You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today I'm chatting about this rise in the consultancy model of employment that we've seen across UK legal services, but particularly in conveyancing. And I'm delighted to welcome one of the proponents of the model, Adrian Jaggard. Adrian is the CEO of Taylor Rose MW, which is obviously one of the largest consultant employers out there, probably the largest. Is it, Adrian?
I think so, possibly. There are a few of us fighting for that title at the moment, I think.
Adrian is also the CEO of AIIC Group, which is the parent company as well. And we're actually going to talk about AIIC in a little bit of detail because you've announced that you're launching in Australia. Thank you very much indeed for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
My first question is always the same. I've done a bit of an introduction to the conversation and a little bit about your role, but tell us about yourself, Adrian. Who are you and what do you do in Taylor Rose and AIIC?
So I'm Adrian Jaggard. I'm a solicitor, and my role in Taylor Rose is, was a founder, co-founder, along with my brother and one or two others, and I'm the CEO. So that's a typical role where I will be responsible for the strategy, working with other directors, and particularly find myself trying to guard the entrepreneurial culture within the business and making sure that we continue on the great journey that we've been on. For AIIC Group, it's a similar role, but much less operational. That's a holding company that owns Taylor Rose and two other law firms, Kingsley Wood and FDR Law, along with a prop tech company called Sloth. So that's more of an investor type position, managing a growing portfolio of businesses.
I know you had an unusual entry into the law as well. We were chatting just before we started to record that you actually went back to university effectively to do your LPC.
Yeah, so embarrassingly, I can't claim to have chased being a solicitor for my entire life or from a young age. I stumbled upon it. I started off life as a cost draftsman, looking for a job to make sure that I didn't get in too much trouble for leaving my A levels midway through from my parents. Enjoying my life in the law. Shortly thereafter, setting up a costs business called Jaggard. So that was working for law firms in litigation matters and also insurers. I founded that with Antony and grew that, and then as the costs landscape changed and there were some legislative changes, we took the opportunity, Antony took the opportunity, my brother, to take some time out and become a solicitor, going back to university. And I, not wanting to be outdone by my younger brother, followed suit thereafter, and we founded Taylor Rose in 2009.
As you founded it, it was obviously a traditional firm in inverted commas. Certainly now it's a much more diverse firm in the sense that you've really grown this consultancy arm of the business whilst retaining your employed staff. Tell me about where that idea kind of came from. How did the business change from being one model to more of a hybrid model?
Okay, so what I would say first of all is we had that entrepreneurial culture from the start. We had that growth drive. A lot of the key roles were brought across from our previous business. So we had a fantastic management team from the outset, and the growth, albeit not through consultancy, was in existence from the beginning. So the reason I've said that is because I think that actually the culture generated the opportunity. So in about 2013 or 2014, we were introduced to a group of lawyers who wanted to set up their own law firm, a group of conveyancers, actually. And they were a fantastic group of very experienced lawyers with a very secure stream of work. They wanted to exit their previous business together and were going to set up a law firm until they were confronted with all the barriers that you face, particularly in conveyancing and setting up from the start. So we agreed a fee share between us that stands true to this day. They're still with us, and that was our very first consultancy. So not an individual; it was a group of lawyers working in a limited company under the regulated framework and banner of Taylor Rose. So we enjoyed that for a few years and got comfortable with it. And I think we had a light bulb moment, where Antony and I were visiting another office, which I will not say the name of, and you'll realise why in a second, where we went there, and we always tied this office in with our first consultancy office. And we came away from both feeling that our consultancy office was performing much better than our employed office. And what were the barriers to us introducing work to them and working closer with them, instead of it being a bolt-on, just simply using our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So at that point, we started to proactively recruit consultants, individuals and groups, and it built from there, really.
You've rightly identified that there are obviously barriers to setting up your own firm. How did that idea develop? How did the practicalities of it develop? I think one of the things that people are really interested in is how the infrastructure around being a consultant works.
We sat down with the management team and worked through responsibilities. Now, it was nowhere near as scientific as what it is nowadays, but we worked through what responsibilities sat with what business, because there are some legal, there's some regulatory requirements, and also there's some practical requirements. We had the benefit of an existing infrastructure that we were simply going to leverage for this new group of lawyers that joining in. And if you think about it practically, we had a little bit of distance between us, but they were based in England, so not too much. And they weren't too different from an employed set of lawyers. I think that was our starting point. And then we just established how we would deviate from that initial starting point. And we created a contract around that initial conversation. Now, that has evolved, and certainly our proposition as a host or a framework law firm or you know, whatever you call it, there's lots of names out there, has developed. But actually, that was our starting point, to be frank, and we worked together. They were servicing their own work, and they slotted into our audit, supervision, our existing infrastructure, obviously using our finance team, our marketing, our brand. They rebranded their office, or they found an office and branded it Taylor Rose very effectively. They did a fantastic job. And to the outside world, the slightly unusual operating model between us was not obvious. It didn't need to be obvious. They were effectively a service supplier to Taylor Rose, and the clients that they serviced were always clients of Taylor Rose, and they had all of the protection and infrastructure and benefits that come with that.
What was the driver for the consultants? In previous podcasts, I've talked to actually people who are a part of Taylor Rose as a consultant, and they talk about, you know, lifestyle and flexibility and all that kind of thing. But, you know, what's your experience of the people that come on board as consultants?
Different consultants have different drivers, and I think it's also changed a bit over time. So in the early stages, for this initial group of lawyers, it was about having a regulated framework to operate. They had their business plan, they had their clients, they had their capability, their expertise. Since then, I would say in the early stages, we would focus on the financial benefits, rightly or wrongly. So particularly in property, individuals who had the requisite experience and qualifications could quite easily transfer across and significantly increase their earnings. They usually doubled their earnings once they were mature, say 6-9 months in. Since then, and obviously we've got things like pandemic in between, since then, I think the majority motivation has changed. And whilst flexibility was always an attractive aspect, and consultants use words like targets, they're looking to escape targets. Target was always a word used negatively when we were recruiting, not by us, by the lawyers themselves. As people realised that they could work from home, which was largely as a result of pandemic, and actually prioritised their personal well-being and their personal flexibility, more so than they did on average before. This became the primary driver for consultancy. Now, what I will say is we have individuals within our consultant program that are very entrepreneurial, and I once heard our consultant program called an army of legal entrepreneurs, which I thought was fantastic. That's why I keep reusing it. But we do have a group of lawyers, no doubt, who are earning a decent margin more than they were previously, and working a fair bit less than they were, so in that middle ground. But then we also have individuals who would have ordinarily pursued a path, I've got no doubt, as an equity partner or forming their own firm. In any event, are using our framework and our structure and our efficiencies and IT and all that sort of thing to still fulfill those entrepreneurial dreams, and they're creating pods and adding people very successfully, and are operating firms within firms that are enjoying fantastic growth.
I don't know whether you're going to want to answer this next question, Adrian, but I'm going to flip it round and ask you about what your requirements are as Taylor Rose, because it's great to have people that want to come to you, but you said right at the start of that answer that the right people will find the right way within consultancy. What are your requirements for people, and have you actually had to turn people away, or have you actually had to terminate people that have been consultants for you?
Okay, so what I can tell you is our requirements have changed over the years. We've got much better at understanding the sort of lawyer that works in a consultancy arrangement. We've got much better at supervising those consultants and creating dynamic supervision structures, dynamic audit structures that respond to characteristics of the individual, rather than just having a blanket position across the board. So that enables us to control risk very effectively. And we are still looking for lawyers that are experienced, are knowledgeable, are capable of working largely autonomously, albeit within our supervision structure. So that hasn't changed throughout, but our advances in internal infrastructure have meant that we have a broader range of lawyers available to us. So we will, for a great example is, we will onboard lawyers that are not solicitors or licensed conveyancers in circumstances if they can demonstrate a great deal of experience and competence, and the supervision structure around them reflects that experience and competence.
So the $1 million question is whether you've, I mean, presumably at some point you've rejected applications for all sorts of reasons, and then whether you've had to go as far as terminating consultants.
So we will terminate consultants every month. I can tell you, consultants can leave for a variety of reasons. Consultancy may not work for them. It doesn't work for everybody, whether they leave on their own accord or whether they are comfortable with what they're doing. If they're not generating enough work, or they're not servicing enough work, because sometimes we will introduce work to them as well, that situation would make us concerned, and we would try and work with that individual to rectify that, and then finding that we may terminate those consultants. It costs us a lot of money to offer the infrastructure and the IT and the PLC and the Westlaw and whatever infrastructure is in place for that individual lawyer. So we are keen to make sure that we don't have a large number of consultants fairly detached from the business, operating on an ad hoc basis. We want something a lot closer. And consultants will often work for us as a consultant and other law firms at the same time, which we're comfortable with. So we definitely wouldn't terminate in that situation. That's a very common situation now.
Here's a loaded question for you then, Adrian. Is the traditional partnership model dead or on its way out? I guess the consultancy model offers a slightly different route to employment for perhaps younger people. I know from experience chatting to practitioners that partnership, and certainly equity partnership, is not quite the aspiration that it once was for a lot of people.
I agree with you. I think that's a really key part of our success, which is when you're making decisions in the interest of the business, they are hardly ever in the interest of everyone in the business. And when you have partnership structures, it encourages groups of partners to, protect each other and,
absolutely.
align themselves on their interests and that sort of thing. And that can have a detrimental effect on the overall betterment of the business, I believe. So by having a narrow, empowered management team, you can just operate a lot more effectively. If you think about that equity partner structure, it's an income structure. It's designed where you're buying on a division of net assets or whatever the structure is. You enjoy, hopefully, an enhanced premium, an enhanced remuneration for the duration of that share of ownership, and then at the end you pass it on to the next generation coming through, and that has worked for a long time. Now, when we look at equity partners, particularly of smaller law firms, which are a really big part of the market in conveyancing in particular, those individuals are feeling a little bit unnerved because there isn't that next generation to pass on, and that next generation are, some of their concerns may be legitimate, they may not be legitimate, but what they are presented with is an indisputable consolidating legal services market, particularly on the consumer side, and conveyancing being one of the fastest consolidating, and a growing gap between smaller and larger firms in things like technology, risk control, professional indemnity insurance premiums, on the SRA regulated conveyancers anyway. And sometimes these businesses are highly leveraged, so it will involve a personal guarantee with the bank. And this collective of considerations, sometimes politics does exist in partnerships, this collective of considerations, when you weigh that up against consultancy, which is another income-based model, consultancy is a really viable alternative, because actually it kills off the majority of those reservations to those individuals, and they still get to have that entrepreneurial flair. They still get to build a business. They still get to build a value. And some approach it and think, well, actually, if I start in a consultancy environment and then I can transition to a directly regulated business that I set up, that's fine. And when someone approaches us with that idea, especially in conveyancing, so they can start to build up momentum and knowledge in relation to lender panels and that sort of thing, we are completely comfortable with that. The reality is they never leave. They never set up their own business, hardly ever, because it's just too difficult for them.
You've talked about the fact that you bring them into the fold. It's a relationship, very much a relationship culture. How does that relationship work practically between other consultants and then between your employed and consultants?
And this is a question that gets asked quite a lot. Our relationship between our employed lawyers and our consultant lawyers is strong. Now, I'm based in our office next to St Paul's, and it's one of our most popular offices for consultancy. And if you look across the office, you would not spot the consultant lawyers from the employed lawyers. Amongst each other, they refer work to each other, they support each other. So actually, there's not as much difference as you might think. Another question that gets asked of us a lot is, do we permit employed lawyers to become consultants? And the answer is yes. So if you meet the minimum criteria for the consultancy program and it's something you want to explore, we are happy to have that conversation with you and transition you across to the consultant program if you wish. And that happens quite frequently as well.
How many consultants do you have now, Adrian?
Depends on the definition, but in our consultant program, that includes their employees and their support, we just tipped over 1,000 people.
And actually, that's a point that we've kind of danced around a bit in the conversation. When you talk about consultant, you're not just talking about an individual. Actually, a number of these have got a wider infrastructure, haven't they? They've got support lawyers that work for them, or even, I guess, perhaps people that have joined together to set up small consultancies themselves.
That's right, and I think that's the beauty of it. I think that flexibility and that ecosystem that's been created is what's one of the greatest things about it. So you will have consultants joining together, you will have consultants employing other lawyers, other non-lawyers, You will have consultants who have sub-consultants on different fee arrangements that aren't eligible to have a direct relationship with Taylor Rose. So they will be fulfilling a part of that supervision structure and obviously taking a part of the remuneration. Or it might be that they've got access to large amounts of work, which is a very valuable thing, and therefore they can bring individuals in. So you have individuals who partner up with other individuals, and they help each other on holidays and as a support structure. And we even have some consultants who offer non-legal services, support services to other consultants. And as long as we're comfortable with the level of that service, which we obviously are when we permit this to continue, it's actually, again, just further evidence of this new way of working, this new ecosystem evolving, and we watch it evolve before our eyes, and we love that dynamic of it.
We paint a very rosy picture of the consultancy model, and it's probably in your interest to do so, Adrian. Tell us about the downside. Because there are some, aren't there, and there are some fairly brutal realities of working as a consultant.
Consultancy doesn't suit everyone. There's no doubt about that. If you struggle with the remote working, now don't get me wrong, there is an option within our consultancy to work in one of our 30 odd offices, but if you struggle with that slightly more independent way of working, whether that's detached literally in terms of where you work, or whether that's more subtle and it's just working slightly more in a silo than as a part of a team, I think you're less likely to be successful as a consultant. If you struggle to secure work as well, that can be another situation when you struggle to be a successful consultant. And the inverse, if you're a self-starter and can generally find work, you will tend to be more successful. Now, another example of where consultants can struggle is when sometimes what were previously directly regulated law firms will come across to us as a group, or a group of lawyers within that directly regulated law firm will come across. And we have noticed that sometimes in that scenario, those groups will come across with too much infrastructure. It's quite a lean model. Consultancy works fantastically as long as you obey the rules. So from a host point of view, we have to be very disciplined in the amount of support we give and make sure that that support is part of the framework and is accounted for, because we're working on leaner margins. And in the same breath, those working within the framework, if they have too much support, so for example, if they bring across practice managers or finance teams or anything like that, or even IT, if it's a slightly larger pod of lawyers coming across, then that can challenge the viability or maybe more likely just the success of it. You've got to play by the rules.
And one of the things that one of the podcasts that we've done highlighted is that you've got to have a bit of business acumen. You've got to have a bit of business nous. Something that I'm still learning, Adrian. I did the acquisition of Today's Media 2 years ago, and every day is a school day still. Is that something that you provide support around?
Beyond your standard systems-based training and continuing professional development, we do bring in speakers in areas like self-promotion, workshops on your LinkedIn, for example, or know your true worth. That's another one we did. At a recent conference, we had Piers Linney from Dragon's Den talking about technology, the future of technology. It was a fantastic piece he did, actually, that left the room electrified, I'll be honest. So on an ad hoc basis, we bring in support like that. You talk about business nous. I think some of it can be transferred from a previous senior role within a business, especially if you've come across as an equity partner. A bit of it can be common sense, I guess. Now, beyond that, we don't provide any additional support, to be quite honest. Now, in relation to our consultant program overall, we partner with Judge Business School Cambridge University and have done since 2015. And I think that's a big part of its success. So we will most years work with that business school to understand our current program, how we can make it better, how we can continue that growth journey. And some of that percolates through the program in the way we recruit consultants, the way we work with consultants, the way we deliver work to them as well. But I think there's probably more to be done, actually. There's more that can be done in terms of that business acumen, because what you do have, if you are successful, and a big part of the success is Taylor Rose providing that lean framework that enables the consultant lawyer to work much more effectively, whether that's fantastic computers or strong market position or the delivery of clients or nice offices to give confidence to those introducers or those clients. And then beyond that framework, it's generally up to the consultant to leverage that infrastructure and build that business. So with that comes a great deal of responsibility that suits some and not others. But also you can get a lot of satisfaction out of that situation and a lot of success as well.
I think it comes back to what we were saying about the right kind of person, will really set that challenge. Let me ask you about Australia. You're launching in Australia imminently. I'm sure there was more strategy to it than stumbling across the opportunity, but tell me about what appealed about Australia in particular.
Okay, so we have, through Judge Business School, actually, we've been aware that there is a fantastic international opportunity linked to consultancy. Just by the nature of the structure of the relationship, it works well across jurisdictions. It works easier across jurisdictions than traditional corporate structures or partnership structures. Not all jurisdictions, but many. So we had that in the back of our minds, and we always felt that going beyond our borders was inevitable, but not at the moment. So when I say stumbled across it, basically there is a law firm in Australia, and they stumbled across, I keep using that word, consultancy in the middle of last year and opened up a consultant program. They were very successful. They recruited 70 consultant lawyers from recollection between July last year and when I met them, which was in December. And they were previously already one of the larger consumer law firms in Australia. They had offices all over Australia, and they were a very successful business. Now, the CEO enjoyed this transition or this new dynamic to his business so much that he started Googling consultancy and worked out that the UK is quite far ahead. So the UK and the US in particular are quite far ahead in the application of consultancy to law. And I'll be frank with you, I had an email out of the blue from James, asking if he could fly over and meet me to discuss consultancy and see whether we could collaborate. He had recognised that the UK was further down the journey, Taylor Rose was further down the journey. We had similar market positions in terms of the types of work that we service. So he came over and we discussed a full integration, a full merger, an acquisition by Taylor Rose of their business, but none were suitable for reasons that were mostly boring. So we devised a joint venture, a fairly integrated joint venture. It wasn't a superficial arrangement, which transitions them over to the Taylor Rose brand and market position. So actually, they've already started trading as Taylor Rose, so it's happened already. So it's strange to say that we've got offices in places like Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney now, which is a very cool thing. Never thought I'd say. But at the same time, the substance behind it was about us transferring all of those lessons learned, all of that learning that had gone on over the last almost 10 years in relation to consultancy, and give them a rapid acceleration in terms of their understanding and their ability to capitalize on it. And that has worked very well. We've had their teams over here, actually, very recently. We've had teams over there. My brother, Antony, co-founder of Taylor Rose, he led a team over there, and we've got someone over there at the moment. So it's been a learning experience both ways. So they're very, very good at technology, actually. So we've been listening to how they're operating on some areas that we're not doing, and vice versa. So I think it will be the start of further collaboration and integration with that business. The joint venture is structured in a way that encourages further integration, hopefully to a full merger or acquisition over the next year or two. But as well as that, it is giving us the confidence to perhaps consider other opportunities in other jurisdictions. Now, there's a big caveat on that, which is we are, as you know, one of the largest conveyancers in the UK, second largest by land reg numbers at the moment, yet we have a 3% market share. We're one of the largest, not quite second largest, maybe top 6 consumer law firms in the UK, and we've got under a 1% market share. So what we're very conscious of is the fact that there is a considerable domestic opportunity. And for us to not focus on that as our primary strategic position seems foolish, and actually would seem like it's a vanity exercise or something like that. So I have this in the back of my mind, but a big part of business is taking opportunities that are presented to you. And we had an opportunity to experience an international joint venture for the first time. We had an opportunity to experience another jurisdiction with different, albeit similar, legislative environment, and given us a flavour, to what there might be more of in the future.
It seems only fair to throw this particular question at you, Adrian, because we have you on the podcast. But you've obviously turned consultancy into a large part of what Taylor Rose does, and I think it's probably fair to say you guys have been quite instrumental in the way that the industry's developed as well. What do you see as the direction of travel for consultancy? Will it become dominant? Is it actually, does traditional law still have its appeal to young lawyers? What's your thoughts?
The foundation of my thoughts rests in my belief in it as a model. So I think it's fundamentally a better model than others out there like partnership. So on that basis, it has to continue developing and continue taking market share. And if we think about other industries, IFAs, for example, the concept of a network, a regulated network with lots of businesses working within that network has dominated their model. And there are a lot of similar drivers between that example and legal services. So I don't know what proportion of the market, particularly in relation to conveyancing, which I think will be higher than others, because conveyancing particularly suits consultancy, will become. But if I had to choose, I would say it would become the dominant model. I think that the characteristics of conveyancing, the turnaround, the sources of work, combining that with efficiencies derived through advanced computer systems, perhaps delivery of work through large panel work, which individual or small firms wouldn't necessarily be able to access. And then on top of that, you throw in fast-paced aspects like AI. Obviously, this feels strange not to mention AI somewhere, even though it's nothing to do with AI. It's mentioned everywhere at the moment. But just having the firepower to invest in yourselves and the firepower to exploit any opportunities that come along the horizon, and effectively having a collective of a large number of us working together and enjoying the advantages of that evolution. It's inevitable, to be quite honest. So I do think that it will become the dominant model. I think it will be a fantastic benefit to legal services, because it won't kill off that self-employed, that entrepreneurial aspect of law, which I think is really important.
To be fair, Adrian, you're bound to say that. So it comes with a bit of bias, but I think you make some very valid points. One of the things that we've discussed, and it's probably the subject of another podcast, is law firm ownership models, where actually, does the traditional equity partner or the traditional LLP model really work for young lawyers and young people that are looking to come into the law? And as I say, another discussion, but interesting nonetheless. It's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. I really, really appreciate you joining and sharing some of your insights, and all the very best with the Australian venture.
Thank you very much, David. I've really enjoyed it.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. Thank you to Adrian. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.